Hey, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Frank About Health. It is May 16th, 2024. We are live from the Hilton, Chicago at the Magnificent Mile. And I'm here with my co-host, Karen Ross. We are celebrating another aspect of May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. But in this particular example, we're not going to talk about just mental health awareness. We're going to be talking about a very powerful story on adoption trauma and the search for one's identity. Based on the current guest and author of the book, Abandoned at Birth, we're going to have a lot of details about that book, that story, and all the mental health issues. But I need to issue a general disclaimer. Unlike my other shows, when I talk about medical issues where you can go out and find the appropriate treatments or solutions, this is about hearing a story of a woman who had mental health issues surrounding her search for where she came from. So we're not issuing a disclaimer that warrants you to question what we say today as opinions or thoughts that you need to speak to your doctor about. However, you will hear from Karen later on in the show about some legal aspects. So there's where my disclaimer applies. Keep in mind, these are facts that have been provided to us in the research of this particular show, and therefore we're only quoting them back. We're not here to argue them or create any kind of litigative situations. So they're not the views of talkradio.nyc or of Frank About Health or of Karen Ross Now or of our special guest today, which, Karen, I will let you do the honors to introduce.
Wonderful. Thank you, Frank. It's great to be back. And I'm honored to introduce Janet, and thank you so much for joining us. This book is a real page turner, no question about that. And Frank even admitted to the fact that it brought tears to his eyes and a lump to the throat. So there's no question that people want to read this, even if they haven't been adopted or don't know someone who has been. They probably will. I love the subtitle of the book, After Abandoned at Birth, Searching for the Arms That Once Held Me. I mean, that in itself is a grabber.
Yes.
We want to talk about some of the facts and figures and laws and obstacles and so on. And we're going to do that up front to kind of get it out of the way, because we really want to spend a lot of time for you to share your compelling story. So let me just introduce everybody to Janet Sherlund, who was adopted at birth. And can we start out by sharing some of these facts about adoption today in our country and just see what kind of position we're in, and has it changed or is it the same for years and years? Share some of the most interesting and impacting facts about that with us, please.
Well, hi, Karen and Frank, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. There are 5 million adoptees in the United States today, and many more, of course, in the foster care system. Adoption has changed a lot from when I was adopted in the 1950s. And I don't have personal experience with current forms of adoption. They're more open adoptions now. But still, the struggle for identity exists in every form of adoption. Most of the information we hear culturally and socially about adoption centers on the birth or adoptive parents. We talk about their wants and needs, adoptive parents who want children, or birth parents who can't keep children, or no one in their family can keep children. They need to give them away. We talk about their morality. We may judge birth parents who can't keep their children, and we grant sainthood to adoptive parents who adopt children. But in those conversations, the adoptee is not being thought of. What does a human being need to grow into an intact, healthy, whole, integrated human being? Well, one of the primary things they need is to have a connection to their heritage, their biological heritage, and the social heritage. They need to know who they are, where they came from, and their story of origin. They need to see themselves mirrored in other people, and when you're adopted, that's taken from you. Those of us that were adopted in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which they call the baby scoop era, our adoptions were usually sealed, completely sealed. All the information about it is sealed. And in 40 states, still today, our records are sealed. So I'm in my 60s. my birth parents and adoptive parents have passed away, the state of New Jersey, where I was adopted, still says, nope, you can't know who you really are. And it's pretty crazy. So I think that the adoption has changed. There are more open adoptions now than there were. But the fact is that many of us who were born in those decades still live and are still being told by government agencies that you don't have the birthright that everyone should have to know who you really are and where you come from.
Well, you state that there are a classic 7 core issues that impact anyone who's been adopted, and that hasn't changed in all those years. Can you just touch on some of the, we may not be able to talk about all 7, but what are the most important?
Well, I think that there's such a sense of, and I'm not going to be citing the list that's in the sort of sociological books, but there is just an innate sense of grief and loss when you are separated from your birth mother. And that happens also with babies who are taken and put in an incubator for an extended period. There's a real trauma. Babies in utero are not blank slates. And in utero, we certainly know well now that you hear your mother's voice and you know her rhythms and you're literally biologically a part of her. So to go from that, and then the trauma of birth, and it's very important for a newborn to be connected after birth with their biological mother. It gives them a sense of security and safety. This is what they know. When you are separated from that, either by being put in an incubator or, for those of us adoptees, taken away from your biological origins and handed to strangers, you feel that. But as an infant, you don't have words to process it. You don't have language yet. So you are not, when you can't recall it later in life because you didn't have words. But for any of us, if I said to each of you, tonight, you're going to go live with that family down the street, people you've never met before, you don't know anything about them, you're going to go live with them. Guess what? They're really nice. They're going to take good care of you and they're going to really love you and give you a good life. But they'll probably change your name and you're going to go, wait a minute, I don't want to go live with some strangers. That's going to feel really uncomfortable and strange. But we do that to infants who have no way of dealing with that or understanding what they're going through. But it's trauma. You're handed to strangers who smell different and sound different and respond to you differently. And that detachment, that sense of, first of all, there's grief and loss. Like, where is the sounds and the smells and the familiar sense that I had for the past 9 months? And now there's a biological feeling of separateness for adoptees, even if you're in a wonderful home with adoptive parents who love you, and that's wonderful. That can't make up for the trauma of having been given away and rejected by your family of origin. And 2 things can be true at once. You can be in a perfectly happy placement and still have been traumatized by adoption.
Absolutely. Well, you talk about the separation from the biological mother, and we can all relate to how traumatic that can be. What about later in life when one decides to seek out their biological mother? What about the biological father? What comes into play there in terms of an adoptee? Did they place a similar importance, less? What have you found in that regard?
I think, in the past, I think it was less, because certainly in the 1950s, when I was adopted, the father's consent or knowledge wasn't needed at all. My biological father discovered at age 75 that he had fathered me. He had no idea he had fathered a child. And certainly they didn't have to sign anything or agree to anything. That has changed over the decades. But I think for many of us who are adopted, it's primarily the mother you think about, because she knew that she was having you. She was the one that carried you.
Yeah.
You heard her voice. It was that connection. And there's something so primal about that connection to the mother. As my husband said, we were talking about my book and these connections, and he said, there's a reason why the dying soldier on the battlefield calls out for his mother.
Mm,
It is primal.
yes.
And there are so many things that we don't have language for or understand as human beings that I think animals do better. I give this example of a mother penguin looking out over a sea of 2,000 baby penguins who to us look all I like, and she can
Yeah,
pick.
right.
So there is something that you just know. I don't know. It's like cellular. And when you're separated from your blood, you feel the difference. You may be with perfectly nice people, but you still feel different. Something's off, something's different, something's other.
Mhm.
And when you do find your blood, in my experience, there is an incredible connection, even if you know nothing about the people that you're standing next to. So there is something there that we don't quite understand or talk about, but it is almost it's sort of an existential and emotional and historical connections that should come into us as this holistic thing that we don't fully have words for, but that is very much a part of belonging and identity, that
Right.
biological thread.
When you mentioned that there are still 40 states where files are closed, do you know if any efforts are being made to change that in those states?
I think most states, there are probably groups that are trying to affect that change in each state. I know I was adopted in New Jersey, and about, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, there was a movement to open the records there. And I believe it was passed in both the House and the Senate in New Jersey, and it was vetoed by our then Governor Chris Christie, who interestingly enough has an adopted sister, I'm told. But so I think it's been an uphill battle in many states, and I think part of the reason is that people don't understand what's going on in the adoptee's life. Again, they've heard
Right.
about the birth parent, and back in my day of adoption, the records were primarily sealed because there was a culture of shame. There was such shame about a woman getting pregnant outside of marriage. And that certainly changed. And of course, that's very offensive to think that, the shame of my birth mother takes precedent over my authentic identity. I
Right.
mean, I'm a grown up. I'm not an infant. But adoptees are so infantilized their whole lives. And in most states, it comes up frequently as groups really push to open records. And now I think adoption records the fight is still there. There's still people hanging on to that old culture of shame.
Yeah.
And now there's often I think insecurity on the part of adoptive parents who don't want their children or the birth parents to be able to find each other.
Right.
And there's very much an inequity in that nowadays, especially, birth parents are often seen as less than.
Mm.
If
Well,
there's
we're gonna have to go to break.
I just wanted to also say there are many questions that were generated by the conversation we just had with Karen. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions as well, we are now being seen on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. Please answer your questions if you have any. And also, this book is what we're going to learn about in the next segment, including some of the questions about what you just mentioned, especially when it comes to meeting your natural parents. So please stay tuned right here on Frank About Health on talkradio.nyc and on the social media that I just mentioned, and we'll be back with you.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. Now, I just have to say, it was very important for us to get all the facts out there about adoption records still being sealed in 40 states, about understanding that there is no really looking into consideration for the adoptee, as Janet mentioned. And there is also the fact that when anyone is in utero, they have nothing but muscle memory from the experience of those 9 months. I am sure that triggers the trauma after you've been carted to a new family, whether it's because that's the way it was planned or if it happened because of the incubator scenario that was also mentioned. So there's a lot to be said about mental health in this story, but it does come from one aspect, which is simply your DNA. And that's what I want to understand. First, I want to first ask you, Janet, when you met your birth father, because I know on another show that you mentioned you did, you had a very positive reaction in that. Would you say that a lot of your, what would you call it, that feeling of a vacuum or abandonment was recovered?
Yeah, that was a most amazing experience, something I never could have imagined. First, I never imagined meeting my birth father. It was always, again, my birth mother that I was thinking about. And I did discover at one point that my birth father didn't know about me. So I thought, how could this now old man who'd never knew about me have anything meaningful, as far as not emotionally meaningful to me? And yet I wanted to know any medical information I could possibly get from him. So I said, yeah, go ahead and find him. They did. And when we met, and adoptees often talk about having a big black hole in our middle, in our center. It feels like someone took a cookie cutter and just cut this hole out of you, and it's just black and empty and endless. And it's just how you feel as you go through life. Something's missing. Something central and critical is missing from you. And my husband and I drive to a appointed place halfway between our home and my birth father's home. And I'm standing there, I'm panicking, I'm so scared, I don't know what to expect, and I'm just kind of in a fog. And there's suddenly this man in front of me, and I'm holding my coat, it's winter, and I'm holding my coat and clutching it to me, and I'm just sort of freaking out. And all of a sudden there are hands over mine, and there's this face looking at me, and these blue eyes looking right into mine, and this man is saying, "You are Janet." And it was my birth father. And in a moment, I didn't know two things about the man. I couldn't have told you what his favorite color was or his address or anything about him. But in that moment, that big black hole filled up, like jammed shut, just ka-chunk. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, how can this possibly be happening? It was so physical. It was so cellular. It was so, the sentence I use is, I finally made sense. Just looking into this man's face and his eyes, I finally made sense. I could see myself. And
I would have to say that is the big lesson right there, to prove that, at least for those that don't have words yet when they were just born, that all of your knowledge of where you come from is inherent. It's in your DNA. It's in your biochemistry. So I think, the older we get as we live through life, the chemistry may slow down a bit, but those messages are forever permanently ingrained in your memory, in your soul. So as a result, that I think they don't say that they're really coincidences. It was meant to be.
Yeah.
I guess what I'd like to understand though is how is it so ironic that in the book you mentioned that when you meet your mother, she was stoic and she didn't even, I mean, you were acting accordingly because you felt enlightened by finally meeting her, but she was dismissive and whatever. Was
She
there
just,
shame in the
yes,
relationship?
she could never get past the shame. So she just was stuck there and she was in such denial. And the agency even spoke about that in the paperwork around my adoption, that she was in a greater level of denial than any birth mother they'd ever dealt with. So she was an exceptional case. But she could not let me in. She just couldn't let me in. And so she was very stiff around me. And yet what's so interesting, or was interesting to me, I learned so much about myself by meeting her because physically there was such resemblances and there were traits about myself that I don't necessarily like that I saw in spades in her. And it was like, oh, cautionary tale. That's not an anomaly. That could become something. Don't let that in. But
Right.
but anytime I was around her, which was only a few times, I physically felt comfortable. I physically felt like I am understood. I understand her and my siblings. I get it. They get me. I am so relaxed physically, cellularly, but she just jammed me emotionally and just kept me out. It was the weirdest. It was such a mind trip to be around her because how can I be feeling so comfortable? And yet she continually gives me the message that I'm not wanted.
Well,
So
here's the thing that I picked up, and tell me if I was, because at the time in the 50s, there was probably shame in being unmarried.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it was absolutely, not. It was just awful for any young woman to get pregnant and out of marriage. Yeah.
Was it pressure from her career? She was involved in politics, right?
No, no, she was not. She was just out of high school when she got pregnant, so she didn't have any career at that point. And
Oh, okay.
and then she wanted to be a secretary and eventually went into real estate. But no, there was nothing political. It was just the times. It was, and there are a lot of great books written about the what young women went through back then. And it's hard for us in this day and age to imagine it. But in that time period, there were families that literally wouldn't talk to a daughter again if she got pregnant out of wedlock. They were just literally ostracized from the family forever. It was a very serious infraction of the social code back then. So she was certainly ashamed of that. What was difficult for me to understand, I was coming to her as a 56-year-old woman who had a very successful and happy life. I didn't need anything from her except to meet her and have a hug and see what we shared. And she just couldn't. She now was on her second marriage. She hadn't lived in the same hometown since she was pregnant with me. I mean, there was no reason why we couldn't have met for a cup of coffee and had that connection, but she just couldn't go there. Couldn't do it.
But as you're dedicating your book to your siblings from that second marriage, they embraced you, apparently,
Oh,
correct?
yes. I mean, I'm so lucky. And that's something the social worker that worked with me in Search had been saying for 5 years to me. You need to reach out to your siblings. You're all adults. They have the right to determine if they want a relationship with you or not. And I was afraid to. I thought, I say things like, well, I thought they might be sort of mean too because she seemed mean to me and she raised them. But really, at the root of it, even in my 50s, even after having a lifetime of therapy, of reading everything I could read about adoption, writing papers on it in college, all of that, I didn't want to make her mad at me. I still wanted her to want me. So it's
What
such
was,
a primal connection.
Yes.
what was the impetus that caused you to decide to look for her? And how old were you?
Well, I wanted to search for her every day of my life. I mean,
Oh,
as a child, I wanted to search for her. And I looked at every face in every crowd and wondered, could you be my mother?
wow.
If someone said to me, oh, do you know so and so? They look a lot like you. I'd go, oh my gosh, I wonder if that's related to me. Since I had absolutely
Probably
no
explains the
information.
picture that you chose for the book cover, right?
Yes. And the subtitle, Searching for the Arms That Once Held Me. And a lot of adoptees, we search because there's this feeling inside that we are not going to be whole until we reconnect with the birth mother, with our origins. And we think this is going to be a way that's going to help ease the loss and the sadness and the grief that we experience. I had, again, wanted to search my whole life. I didn't have any information with which to search. And I also didn't want to offend my adopted parents. And even though my adopted mother said, "Oh, you should search," I knew she didn't really mean it. She was trying to be supportive, but children understand. You get those subtle messages from your parents. They say one thing, but they mean another. I
Yes.
didn't want to hurt them. I did try after college to sign up with a registry that was then active, where you could sign it, send in your information and they'd try and match. And I was so sure, given the false narrative my adoption agency had told me with the little information they shared with me at that time, that my lovely, mature, wonderful birth mother would be searching for me too. And it was after a few years I went, "Oh, I guess no one's really looking for me." And it also occurred to me then that, yes, I wanted to search and find, but I also wanted to be found. And that's a real difference. Me searching is one thing, but the idea that someone would be looking for me and want me was so important, and that wasn't happening.
You at least had the luck of, even in the state of New Jersey, to have that particular adoption agency person help you get the letters and paperwork when she was creating the necessary adoption proceeding. Correct?
Well, that at college, when I had written a paper in college about identity and adoption, and I sent it to the agency and said, "Please tell me whatever you can." Like I use that as a sort of a calling card. Like, I'm not just a crazy adoptee. I've really studied this and thought about it. And please tell me whatever you can. They gave me a little information, but they also gave me a lot of false information. Like, "Oh, your birth parents are from a distant state." They were an hour and a half over the state line from where I grew up. I mean, they were in a distant state, and there were a lot of things about it. And definitely the agenda of the letter was, everything's fine. We did we did a great job. You should be happy. Don't ask these questions. And it wasn't until I was in my 50s and discovered a link on the website of my adoption agency that said search, that I found out that they would connect an adoptee and a birth parent if both mutually agreed. And that's when I applied to them. I had to wait 9 months before my name came up on the list. Then I had to have an interview with them. Then I had to write a letter to my birth mother and telling her why I wanted to meet her and get pictures. And they had to be a go-between. And that's when they found her right away, but she refused to meet me. So.
Okay, we're about to take our next break, but I have one final question, and that is, when did you know that you were adopted? You always felt it internally, but did you ask your adoptive parents, "Why do I not feel?" How did that happen?
We always knew. There are 4 of us. We were all adopted from different families, and I always knew it was part of our bedtime story. So while I knew I was adopted, we didn't really talk about what that meant or how that felt. It was just, we were all adopted. And I actually was old enough. I was in 2nd grade when we adopted my youngest sister. And I remember going with my parents to the agency to pick her up. So the process was very apparent, but the meaning and the feelings were not discussed.
Understood. So, ladies and gentlemen, when we return, and Karen, I know you've got some questions. I'm anxious to hear what they are because they're probably in line with what I'm thinking. But this is a very compelling book. You need to buy it as soon as this show ends. It's airing right now, right here on talkradio.nyc and our socials. But if you have any other questions to add as well, the next section 3, feel free to chat in YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook, and our engineer Logan will give us what they are, and it will do the best to answer. But this is a must read, honestly. We'll be back in a few.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. During commercial break, a lot of conversations you probably all out there are seeing us have. Again, Janet Sherlund's story is impeccable, and it's incredible, and it actually resonates a lot with Karen. So I'm going to let this segment be about the shared experience that you'll learn about, and it'll all wrap up in the final segment and how this all applies to one's mental health. So that being said, Karen.
Very good. And if something comes to your mind, just give us a ring. I was just mentioning to Frank that I have a nephew who is adopted, and he was adopted into a family that already had 4 biological children. And I think that he's never quite felt a part of that family. And my sister was always very open that he knew from the start that he was adopted and made to feel special. That, you know, we all hear that adopted children are often told they were chosen, and that makes them a little bit special. But remember my sister telling a story about this nephew finding some pictures, and he happened to find a picture of his biological father. And his biological father was tall and skinny, and so was this young man. He played basketball. He'd shoot baskets 24 hours a day if you let him. And when you looked at his biological father, he looked the same, tall, lanky, basketball type person. And he was a professional, interestingly, the biological father. But it's my understanding that he's no longer with us, nor is the biological mother. But this young man has continued to suffer some real challenges in life. And I think that we all think that they come from the root of having been adopted. I'm sure you hear all kinds of stories. And I think you've alluded to a common thread. But do you want to talk a little bit more about that? It can take on different manifestations, look different in different families, different kids, but some more of those common threads that the adopted child feels.
And I think it's so true, and I think it can be so difficult for adoptive parents to understand that love is not enough, and that there is just something in the wonderful book, The Primal Wound by Nancy Newton Verrier, that was written in the 1990s. She talks about the fact that there is never a substitute for the primary mother, that no matter what, they can tell you were chosen or told they're blue in the face, but the fact is someone gave you away. Someone didn't want you. Your blood gave you away. And that is so hurtful and so traumatic. And love alone can't fix that. And I think one of the things I think would have been helpful for me is to certainly have knowledge of my biological family, see pictures of, the people I look like, because I look like both my parents, my biological parents very much, to know something about my ethnicity and my personality and et cetera, and have that known and respected and talked openly about. Of course, that didn't happen back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And trauma can be expressed in a lot of ways. Sometimes I also hear the story that, I know people that have both biological and adopted kids, and the adopted kids are the good ones. They behave so beautifully, and the biological. And I say, red flag, because in my family there were four of us. Two of us were tried to be the perfect children, and two tried to be the hellions, and two were the hellions. And that's very classic. As an adoptee, you're either so scared and insecure, you want to be the perfect child so that this family doesn't give you away. And you want to assure your place and your acceptance and your love. And then another personality may do like two of my siblings and just push back and test the waters and fight everything and almost dare these parents to reject you. So those are two classic scenarios. And it's a fact that adoptees have 4 times the suicide rate that the general population does. I mean, this is a
Really?
real trauma. And I think, my way of coping was to be one of the, try to be the perfect child. And that's not a good thing. And anyone looking at our family would have said that about me. I think my parents felt that way about me. That's not a good thing. That's not healthy. I wasn't free to express my full range of emotions. I wasn't free to act how my gut instinct might have me to act. I was so busy trying to mirror and behave in the way that my adoptive parents would most appreciate and to their values. And so it doesn't allow for healthy development when you're so beholden to people, so scared for your very safety and existence. And I had such anxiety. Again, I just was born like this, more in tune to these things, I suppose. I had such anxiety that when I was like 12 years old, I started having really severe panic attacks. I mean, like LSD level panic attacks. And they continued for into my late 20s. And I finally was able to got help and got some medication that at the time really helped me attack them. And I since haven't suffered from them. But for that very formative period of my life, it ruled over all my decisions, things I would do or not do. And the fear I had, it came from living with such chronic anxiety of feeling so alone and untethered and just frightened and insecure. And so,
Sure.
and other siblings had other issues, but mine was expressed in these really severe panic attacks. And yet I was so busy trying to be the perfect child that I would push myself to exhaustion to do things that scared me. And I'd suffer these panic attacks because I just didn't want to be seen as, weak or embarrass my parents by not being able to do something. And it was terrifying. Every time I had when I thought I was dying or going crazy, and
Yeah.
I was certainly not spending my adolescence forming a sense of self and a strong core. I was just trying to exist.
You talk about several pivotal moments in your life, and you came up with some really wonderful chapter titles. And one of them was Finding Your Voice. Tell us a little bit about what happened at that point. And you've created your story in a chronology that makes it very easy to follow, very interesting addition to the way you spell it out. But tell us a little bit about that part of your life.
Well, I think you're referring to the time when I was in college, and I think I just I really fell apart. I think when I got to Colgate, where I had transferred to, and I had sort of grown. I had been very dependent on my adoptive parents growing up, and I had sort of now finally broken. I wasn't at home anymore. I was living away at college. I broke up with a high school boyfriend that I'd been too dependent on, and I had changed universities to better study my chosen major. And I just, at that point in time, I had sort of let go of all my crutches I'd been using, and I hadn't yet formed ones, and I was really floundering. And it just really took me sort of falling apart and sort of hitting bottom. And then, being able to push back up from the bottom. I poetry and reading and finding some classwork, some coursework that talked about early childhood development. And I was like, oh, huh. And then finding some readings and work about adoption. And I was like, oh my gosh, the things I've been dealing with are because I'm adopted, and this is speaking to me. This is telling my truth. And there wasn't a lot. This was the 1970s. There wasn't a lot that I was able to discover at that point, but there was enough that it helped me define what was going on, and that I wasn't crazy, and that I wasn't weak. I was just fighting a lot and dealing with a lot.
Mhm.
And then really trying to start piecing myself together, start, doing a search and reading everything I could get my hands on, and studying it. I did this independent study on identity and adoption, and it really started to help me find myself and find a voice, and to try and understand what had been happening to me all those years.
Absolutely. Well, then you mentioned your relationship with your biological siblings. I'm curious about your relationship with your adopted siblings. And you mentioned that two of you were one way and two were another way. What is your current relationship with them?
Well, sadly, my older brother passed away. He had a stroke very young. We didn't know he had inherited high blood pressure, and he didn't really understand that. And so, sorry that he's passed for quite a while now. He was one of the hellions, but he was also someone who was the other one that really took care of mom and dad and really helped with mom and dad a lot. And he was also the one who, when I was going through a really rough time in college and I was just falling apart one day, and I called him. He was married and had little kids at the time. And I just called to I don't know, touch base with someone and, get distracted. He jumped, he said, "I'm coming to get you," and jumped in the car and drove 4.5 hours immediately to come pick me up.
Wow.
And so he was someone that wanted to always help. And so my younger brother, we were just talking the other day. He doesn't live near me anymore, but I never talked to him about adoption. And the last time I had, he said, "No, I'm not. Mom and dad are my parents. I don't care." And then he said, "That's not true." He said, "Actually, Eric, my other brother, and I talked about adoption a lot growing up." And he said, "And I think I was defensive because I thought, if my real parents don't want me, to hell with them. I don't want them either." And he said, "But now I realize I'd like to search. I do want them." And my younger sister and I did speak about it throughout our lives. She was 7 years younger than me. So, and we weren't always together. I was off at college, et cetera, but we did speak about it. And I then actually helped her find her birth mother after I found mine. So
Interesting. Well, I think we're going to another break,
We're
right?
going to another break. But before, by the way, can your nephew relate to some of the stuff that?
Oh, I'm sure he can. I'm sure he can. I'm eager to share this show with him when the time comes. And maybe he reads much, but I'd love for him to read your book.
So, ladies and gentlemen, when we come back, we will wrap up a lot. The importance of getting this book, some takeaways that I've picked up during the last 45 minutes about different mental health awareness issues to be aware of, not just for adoptees, for those that suffer from similar symptoms. And I guess maybe you want to wrap up some of the adoption issues that the state should be looking into changing.
Possibly. Oh, let's do that when we come back.
So we'll be back right here on Frank About Health to wrap up our entire show and to really give a lot of kudos to Janet, sharing pretty much her fight, her identity, where she came from, who she is, meeting her parent, knowing the value of relationships, whether they're DNA related or not. And it's an education for all of us. Please stay tuned.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Broncu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. We're now going to wrap up the show and give a lot of ways for all you listeners and viewers out there that if you're an adoptee or even if you're not, or if you're suffering from specific mental health issues, maybe we get some clarity on that. I also hear that it's hard to hear me, so I'm just going to be very frank at this moment and just speak right into the camera. So that being said, Logan, thanks for all the prompts and everything, and also thank you for monitoring any questions that may be coming in. But also, Janet, just so you know, when the show is archived and people can replay it and stuff like that, you might get a lot of questions through your email or social media. So that's another avenue. But at least we've had a very thoughtful 45 minutes. And I know, Karen, you want all the names. No, Karen, you wanted to wrap up some key things for me.
Yeah. And if anybody's wondered why Frank was like this in front of me, it was just a little bit of a technical glitch with a microphone. So he's not really trying to edge me out. And I do want to ask Janet, if someone is listening to this or maybe they read your book and they're in one of those 40 states that still does not allow an adoptee to find their natural parent. And they decide, well, boy, I'm going to do this and I'm going to change things for my life and other adoptees. What would you say should be their first step?
I would say to Google what organizations in your state are there for adoption advocates. And it's probably not organizations that are centered around adoptive parents. Probably an organization that focuses on adoptees. And I think there are different ones in state law. These are all state laws. But I think if you Google that, you'll probably find some groups, or you might find adoptee support groups, and those individuals would probably have knowledge of that. But start by finding a group, an advocacy group, or just a support group for adoptees in your state. And I think that will lead you down the right path.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to pass it back to Frank, and I think he has a couple of other questions about the book, but I want to just echo what he has said. Whether you are an adoptee, an adoptive parent, whatever your situation is, this is an impactful, compelling book, and everyone should read it. So I'm going to sign off, so to speak, and pass it back over to Frank. But thank you so much for joining us today, Janet.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And again, this is just so that all of you out there can hear me. No offense to you, because Karen, without you, this show would have not happened.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Now, basically everyone out there, even though we've spent the last 45 minutes talking about what it's like for an adoptee to go for the search for where they came from and to experience either the pleasure or the trauma of that eventual meeting, if it does occur, or in Janet's case, to actually meet her biological father, which was not even part of her original intention. It at least gave her some of the benefits that she unfortunately did not seek or did not receive from her mother when she finally met her. But yet, there's the also aspect that I want to remind everyone that when you are in utero, your life experience is memorized by your cells, by your DNA. This is something you can look up on Google or Perplexity, that our DNA speaks louder than sometimes we do. The gift of words is something we learn after we're born, but listen to yourself. So I would say that one lesson to take away from this entire episode is that your intuition is key. Like I always talk about on every episode, self-advocacy in your healthcare. whether it's mental or physical, is primal. It's necessary in order to have a decent quality of life, especially the type of life that Janet had in trying to seek where she came from, while having a good support network from your biological siblings. That to me was a gift. From when I read it, I think you definitely had experienced not just that gift, but also the gift of meeting your father. I think meeting your mother, you had to for many reasons, obviously in your quest, but considering that you did not receive what you wanted, you definitely learned a lot. I would venture to guess you and I have a friend in common. Um, Not Janet, because that's you. The replacement child forum, Judy Mendel,
Yes.
and she actually lived with her parents, but she was considered a replacement due to the death of a sibling. And she apparently experienced some of the same traumas you did. So I guess if anything, my big takeaway besides the DNA argument or DNA theory is that when you are quote unquote abandoned or unwanted, the trauma really sparks off all the other personality attributes that one can have. Anxiety, you mentioned panic attacks, depression, probably even OCD or PTSD, or depending on the circumstances. What would you say is the common thread in all of the mental health attributes that people suffer from that adoptees go through? Is it predominantly of a psychiatric nature, or is it a behavioral one?
That's hard to say. I think most adoptees have PTSD. And I think that, again, we have 4 times the suicide rate. We have a very high addiction and substance abuse problem, and also are overrepresented in the penal system, the legal system, and the mental health facilities. So there is real trauma. And one thing I'd like to say to adoptees is listen to your gut. As you're saying, you're not crazy. There's nothing wrong with you. You are facing an immense trauma that is not socially recognized. We are asked to be grateful for the lives we are given, and people just don't understand this trauma. But listen to your gut, believe in yourself, and find strength and support and help in therapists or support groups or other people, books that affirm that, so that you become strong, and then gather all the information you can about yourself, biological self, and piece it together, and you will ultimately be strong enough to face such a lone feeling that you live with as an adoptee. But trust yourself. You know that it's happening to you. Don't let anyone tell you this isn't or you shouldn't be. It is, and find the support and help to get you through it. You'll
Including hopefully try to do whatever legislative activities they can do to overturn the unsealing of records in those.
Absolutely.
I just want to read a direct quote from your people at Merrill Moss Media Group. I know you thank them at your book also. But this is for all of you listeners and viewers out there, because this is the sure way I believe you will want to go out and buy this book. Janet Sherlund raised her family and served on nonprofit boards in education, health, and the cultural arts before writing her memoir. Abandoned at birth, her single most significant life event was being given up for adoption. Being adopted made her feel as though she was living a borrowed life, undermined her sense of trust and personal value, and impacted every decision she's made. It also led to a lifelong quest to find her biological mother, with the hope of finally meeting a tether to this world, a sense of belonging, and ultimately herself. Her memoir fulfills a lifelong dream of becoming a published author, as well as raising awareness about loss and grief and adoption, and why it takes more than love to survive the trauma. It is on point. It is cohesive. It is a must read. I highly recommend it. Please announce where they can buy this book.
Anywhere books are sold, your local bookstore, barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, bookshop.org, and your local bookstore.
Awesome.
Is there an audible version?
There is an audio and an ebook and the hard copy all out. Yes.
Great.
Awesome. Well, I'm getting the prompts. We're 2 minutes to ending. So Thank you, Janet. And I'd like to thank Deb Ziff out there if you're watching. Twice is a charm so far. I look forward to potentially working with you again on other very poignant stories about mental health and a sense of belonging and identity. At the time, thank you, Karen. We will be here together in 3 more weeks as we celebrate whatever Health Awareness Month June provides. We're here at the Hilton Chicago Magnificent Mile at the Hilton Suites. Beautiful view of Lake Michigan. So I have pictures, but for anyone who wants them, my email is
If I could just throw out, Karen Ross now, I'm a hypnotherapist and coach. And if you're interested, when you talk about the DNA, I have worked with people where we find belief systems that go all the way back to babyhood.
Yes.
So that can be life-changing for people. And we can do that through the very simple, easy process of hypnotherapy.
Yes. And remember, I already told you, I've been working with her before in that work, and it does work. It does work. That all being said, slate of shows tomorrow on talkradio.nyc include Philanthropy in Focus with Tommy D, and then always Friday with Steve Fry. On Tuesday, we have the Hard Skills with Dr. Mira Branco. After that, we have the Happy Spot. And then on Thursday, after the Conscious Consultant Hour, excuse me, and our show, Politics, Health, excuse me, and some other issues. There's another episode of Frank About Health. I will have a better voice next week. And at the same time, Mind, Body, Health, and Politics at 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock actually, and then I'm at 5. And I will see you all next week. Thank you again for everybody.
Thank Janet. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you,
very much.
Hilton. Thank you, Logan. And thank you, Sam. And thank you, Deb. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.